Hey everyone, welcome back to Grid Chat. Today we are recapping the wettest race of the season, and I couldn't do that alone, so I brought my friend James Coker back, who you've heard before. He's been on the podcast before. He's a content creator. He's very funny. He's a good pal. Welcome back, James.
Howdy. Thanks so much for having me. So glad to be here.
So glad to have you. Every time we have a good time, so I figured, why not?
Hundo P.
Also, this was like genuinely the most chaotic race I think we've had all season.
Yeah.
Lots to talk about.
Let me tell you, I feel like Formula One Grand Prix are like brisket. The wetter, the better. You know?
You're right. No one's ever asked for a dry brisket. We do continually get dry races, so
Nobody wants dry ass brisket.
that's
You
so
kidding me?
true. Watching this race, I was like, actually, you know what? I love a wet race. I think it was a great time to watch, a great adventure.
I think it's the ultimate equalizer. I think it is good that it wasn't actively raining for the most part. I mean,
Yeah.
I think later in the race they got hit with some spurts of rain.
Mhm.
But like, I don't want to see them racing in like a downpour, but I do like them racing on a wet track because I just feel like it's a nice equalizer for all the teams involved.
Yeah, I think it also is like so much less forgiving when you go off the racing line, because as you watch the
Oh, yeah.
track, like it's literally only drying on the racing line, and it's like watching F124, like you know exactly where the cars are supposed to go, like with the little green
Yeah.
line. So it's interesting to watch, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed myself. A lot more fun.
Yeah, I think it throws like a lot of the sort of just the typical strategy out the window, because it's not just like, all right, are we gonna do hards and then for most of the race and then finish with mediums? Are we doing like soft, medium, soft? Like, I feel like most races, the teams are like considering like two strategies and that's it.
Yeah.
But with a race like this, there's like an infinite number of strategies. It's like that line from Mean Girls, the limit doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's cool to watch too, because it's like you've got so many more tire options, like you were saying, and then you get to like bring in the wets versus the inters, which we saw with Haas, which we'll get into. But it gives you, I think, just more excitement of different possible options. It's not the same race that we always see every time. And it's always funny too, because the one thing I do find interesting with the schedule overall, like it's been criticized by Max recently for like sustainability and travel, but also certain races they continue to put in certain areas that you know the weather is going to be bad no matter what. Like Montreal in June, even though it's the summer, is still, it's going to be cold, it's going to rain. And then you have like Vegas in November as a night race, as though it won't be freezing. And you continue to have
Yeah.
like those same choices. And I always wonder if it's partially for the fact that you get more, variation in the types of races that you have, but at the same time, it does cause, crashes and other issues.
I think that's at the back of their mind. I think it's really just scheduling and money. I don't think they're like, oh, let's go here at this time because it's gonna be real wet.
Can you imagine? I'm like, now I have like a board meeting in my mind with them being like, this will be the wettest option. And we're gonna go on a scale down to the least wet option. Pick our wet.
Yeah.
Well, other than rain and also groundhogs, leading up to the race, we had quite a bit of silly season drama, which I think also factored into the race itself, which was kind of fun. How are you feeling about Esteban and his departure from Alpine?
I mean, I feel like it was bound to happen. Like, I made a video about this and I got destroyed in the comments for it, but I felt like a lot of the Esteban Ocon hate is unwarranted. Like, yes, he has had like, some incidents with his teammates. He has a reputation for being like a little aggressive, especially when racing against someone on his own team. But he got like a lot of like hate and vitriol and negativity online that I felt like was maybe like a little too far. I do think I feel for him because I think the pairing of Esteban and Pierre Gasly was doomed to fail.
Yeah.
You've seen interviews with them and they used to be good friends. And then when Pierre started beating Esteban Ocon when they were in their karting days, he could not compartmentalize like the friendship and the competition of them as drivers. And they stopped being friends. And so I think being like, oh, hey, let's put two French drivers on the French team. Like, how cute. Like, I think like the novelty of that like wore off almost immediately.
Yeah.
And it created like a toxic environment for all parties involved. Yeah.
I agree. I saw your video and I agreed with you, honestly, because the thing with F1, especially lately, in terms of like the fan base talking about things, is it's gone from like normal criticism and normal like kind of team allegiance or driver allegiance, which is one thing, to like very personal attacks. And I think there's a really
Yeah.
fine line in sports for that. And I think, to the point that Esteban had to post his statement, which personally I thought was the wrong move because all it's going to do is make people talk about it more. Uh,
Right.
just in general terms of like people talking about you and bullying. But if it went poor, if it was that bad between Monaco and Montreal for him to feel like he needed to actually make a statement, obviously he was seeing far more stuff than we probably even saw because there's DMs, there's emails, there's all of that. But yeah, I thought it was over the line of rivalry in sports fandom.
Yeah. And Esteban was there before Pierre showed up. And so yeah, I just feel like it was doomed to fail. And Alpine has organizational problems like on a much larger level than just their driver pairing. So like I don't know. They kind of need to do like a full restart, in my opinion. I don't know where Esteban Ocon can go from here. I don't see Williams signing him.
No,
I see him going to Haas, like maybe Mercedes on 1 year while they wait for Kimi Antonelli to be ready because Toto manages Esteban,
yeah.
or maybe like Mercedes reserve driver. But like other than that, I really don't see a space for him on the F1 grid. So I don't know if he's going to go to Formula E or if he's going to just do like endurance or
Yeah, and, to
um,
some degree, I wonder if, like, moving to a different series is better for him anyway, but obviously no one wants to have to drop off of Formula 1 to go to what they view as a lower series, but I think there's been, like, a lot of talk of Logan going to IndyCar next year and how that might be a better fit for him anyways, and I kind of wonder the same with Esteban, like, in terms of the sport itself has, like, such a culture of, you have to fit in a very specific way, and I think he struggled with that. So it's hard to say what team he would be a fit for overall, especially with the Mercedes thing. I feel like because Toto did make this statement basically telling Carlos, or basically saying that they told Carlos we're focused on Kimi Antonelli. And some people took that as they expect to see Kimi actually signed for that seat. And other people took it as that was the reason why they were only going to give him a 1 year. So if it's
yeah,
a 1 year situation, then I could see Esteban potentially getting that, just kind of essentially sitting there to keep the seat warm type of situation.
yeah.
Um, because Carlos very clearly doesn't intend to take a 1 year contract. So I don't know.
But it could make sense for Esteban to go there because like Toto has a vested interest in him.
Mhm.
He trusts him probably to a degree. And so it could make sense for him to go there for a year until Kimi Antonelli is ready to drive for Mercedes.
I would be fascinated to see how him and George managed because they're both such emotional drivers in terms of like
Yeah.
I'd be intrigued. I don't think it necessarily would be the best pairing, but who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
No, you could be right. But like most drivers that I watch and like root for or I always want to see a driver get an opportunity to drive for a top team.
mhm,
And I know Mercedes is not currently like in their golden years the way they were at the beginning and throughout the turbo hybrid era,
mhm.
but like I would love to see Esteban Ocon get an opportunity to drive a better car.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see, and then also to be completely fair, George's contract is up at the end of next year. So when they are
Hmm.
assigning Kimi, I kind of feel like it would make sense for Mercedes to sign a driver that they can compare to George for the next year, and then if they're
Yeah.
dead set on bringing Kimi Antonelli in, they can decide, do we go with George or do we go with this other driver?
Oh, that's interesting. Who would that be?
That's why I thought Carlos would make sense to take that seat because if you
Yeah,
put
right.
Carlos against like in terms of Carlos agreeing to a 1 year contract, it would have made sense because if you put Carlos against George, I think that the option is very clear which driver is going to be more
Yeah.
successful. For me, and maybe it's just because I'm a risk taker and also because I'm not a professional athlete that makes my livelihood driving cars, so I can say this. But for me, I would take the year with the top team, knowing that my competition objectively is beneath me and
Yeah.
that there's only going to be one seat. They're going to take this Kimi Antonelli kid in, and he's going to get one of the two seats. But looking at it for a 1 year up against George competing for that seat, I think Carlos would have won, and it would have made more sense. But it's obviously a risk.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like James Vowles has said in his public campaign to sign Carlos Sainz, uh, Carlos Sainz has a reputation of making the teams he drives for
Mm,
better. Uh, he's been given a lot of credit with helping develop cars.
yeah, I think, like, it's a good point that they need someone who can also help with the car because it also feels like right now
Hmm.
all of the car changes are being done off of Lewis's data and feedback still, and George is benefiting from them. Um, so it seems like I worry that next year is going to be very bad for Mercedes. Maybe worry is the wrong word. I'm not super worried personally for them, but but I am intrigued to see who they put in that other seat because it does feel like they have the opportunity to like have their pick of who's available and test them against who would be the best fit to go with Kimmy for a year from now.
Yeah,
So who
for
knows?
sure.
And then the other big contract drama is at VCarb because well, I keep seeing everyone saying Yuki renewed, but they just picked up the option. There wasn't like a large amount of negotiation to my understanding. They had an option to
Hmm.
sign him for one more year, which they picked up, which just means to me that he didn't get a better offer from another team for something long term.
Yeah, no, I was a little surprised that VCarb picked up the option for Yuki, especially since the partnership with Honda is ending soon. Is it end of this year?
So it ends the end of next year. So my
Okay.
conspiracy theory is that their intent is to try to take Yuki to Aston eventually, and that there
Mm,
might be some talk of Lance being done. Like not because of anything other than he's like tired of it, which I've been getting that
yeah,
vibe. I think everyone's kind of been
sure.
getting that vibe. So I think
Yeah.
Honda's moving to Aston in 2026, and I
Hmm.
feel like the negotiations, the reason Yuki stayed is that Honda has publicly said they'd like to have Yuki at Aston Martin. It's just a matter of a seat being opened. And
Hmm.
Yuki's publicly said that he'd like to stay with Honda if he can. So I feel like this keeps him in the sport for a year and then they convince Lance to try doing something else with his life and then he takes that seat.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing for me is like I saw either Yuki or Daniel getting brought back for next year. I did not see both of them.
Mhm.
So I assume this means more likely than not, Daniel Ricciardo will not be in a V carb next year.
Yeah, I kind of get the vibe that they haven't made the decision yet, but that it is a contentious one. Because
Hmm.
at the end of the race yesterday, they basically said like they gave him the right to, it's okay to go ahead and fight Yuki, which I kind of took as them saying like prove that you can still hold your own, especially after I assume you saw the Jacques Villeneuve rant,
Yeah,
I would say.
sure.
When
TLDR, if
yeah.
anyone listening didn't hear it, Jacques Villeneuve essentially said Daniel Ricciardo is washed and shouldn't still be in Formula One.
I kind of thought I was like to some degree I get his point and I feel where you're coming from, but at the same time I was almost like the intensity at which he said it I thought was a little egregious. It was like what because he literally says what is he still doing in the sport? And I was like, okay, I get it, but I also felt like he washed out the entirety of Daniel's career, which was surprising to me because I
Mhm.
think you can arguably say like he's had his chance to come back and he obviously can't keep going and we should put somebody else in. I think plenty of people have said that, and I think I've even said that. I'd rather see Liam in that seat. But at the same time, I was very surprised to see the intensity at which he was basically like, what has he ever done in Formula One? It's like, oh,
Yeah. I mean, I think that is a typical example of like a former driver or personality who's works in like just in sports in general that is looking to have some sense of relevancy.
yeah,
I think he was just trying to like spit a hot take and make headlines.
yeah, a little rage bait.
Yeah, that's the vibe that I got, and it's because it's like not like Jacques Villeneuve's a scrub. He's like it's a world
Yeah.
champion, but I think he was just like, oh, just wait for this juicy hot take. People are, I'm gonna be all over the news with this one.
He did, he was good. Yeah, success. Congratulations.
Jacques Villeneuve is hot take Tyler
Yeah.
over here.
But I do think like I think you're right. It'll be interesting to see if he sticks around. Or if they give that to Liam. So I don't
I
know.
assume Liam Lawson's gonna be in that seat next year. I could be wrong,
I think it's
but
I don't know. Helmet basically said that he wants Liam, but that Christian wants Daniel, and that it's an
uh,
internal. battle. So
Okay. All right.
we'll see. But I mean, you have to take everything Helmet says with like the tiniest grain of salt.
If Liam Lawson doesn't get a seat next year, I'm gonna feel so bad for the kid because he deserves to get a ride for at least a season.
I agree.
He's
Yeah.
shown that. So I don't know, but also like with the Jacques Villeneuve thing, and I like Daniel Ricciardo.
Mm,
Like, I mean, I do think people hold him in a higher light than he deserves to be because they love him
mm,
because he's like very charismatic and personable.
mm,
Like, but if you were like talking about a driver simply on like stats alone, and we were putting their personality aside, I think most people would be saying what Jacques Villeneuve is saying
yeah.
online. It's just the fact that people love Daniel Ricciardo and they want to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. I am curious too though, because I would say, given I'm trying to find the most diplomatic way to say this, but given his response when the Red Bull organization was going through their public um, issues this season with Christian, I I
Yeah,
I found that I did note there was a little bit of a misunderstanding of who his audience is. Um,
100%.
and it was interesting because I think part of the argument of him potentially losing that seat is the fact that he has lost a portion of that likability from the way he handled that situation.
Yeah, if you don't want to say it, I will. The vast majority of fans of Daniel Ricciardo fans, or a large portion of Daniel Ricciardo fans, are women.
Yeah,
And in response to what was happening at Red Bull, he, I mean, granted, the reporter kind of fed him the line to get the soundbite
yeah.
and said, "Is this just a distraction?" And he said it back and was like, "Yeah, you know, it's just a distraction. We're trying to like black out the noise." But like the fact that Daniel Ricciardo has a fan base that is largely female, and he didn't issue any kind of statement saying, I support women in motorsport, and this does, regardless of like this specific incident, motorsport and Formula One needs to be a place where women feel safe and women are celebrated and respected
Mhm.
and treated equally as men. The fact that he did not do that is, in my opinion, like a kind of a PR blunder.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of his female fans were very frustrated with him and probably aren't in his quarter the way they were before.
Yeah, I think that you said that better than I could have, and perhaps it's because I'm a little, unbiased about the situation. A
Sure.
little
Yeah.
no, sorry, a little biased about the situation, not unbiased. But yeah, I think the other thing about it is, like, not only does he have a very large female fan base that supports him openly online, but he has a very large female fan base that spends a lot of money on his own personal brand, specifically on
Yeah.
Enchanté, and uh, it's, like, difficult. It was I remember when it happened, when he made that statement, I was like, "I have, like, a $120 sweatshirt that I don't really wanna ever wear again," you know? And it's like,
Yeah.
that's the I think the little things that you're not thinking about when you're making those statements and he should be thinking about. And yeah, it's frustrating. And to be fair to him, I wouldn't say that 90% of the grid made a statement that I would have liked to have seen.
Yeah. I feel like Lewis and George were the only people that said anything like worthy of note in defense of like treating women with respect in the world of
Yeah,
motorsport.
it was I think it was Louis George, and Zach Brown, but, there's been Zach
Yeah.
makes certain moves that I think
Are calculated.
yes, that's so it's like I don't know how much of, it was a strong statement, but I don't know how much of it was about, making women
I think it
feel
was less
welcome.
about the topic and more about taking Christian Horner down.
Exactly, and you could kind of feel it. You could kind of feel it in the statement. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that was the hard part. Is it's like I think he's overestimating how much people are willing to stay in his corner without without both performance and kind of knowing your audience. Like you kind of can't. You have to have one or the other or both, but you can't not have either of them. If that makes sense. So
Yeah, which brings up like another really good topic. Like, I feel like there are very few drivers in Formula One that feel like they can really speak their mind. I
mm,
feel like Lewis is one of the few, and Lewis and Max are probably the only two drivers that I see speak their mind on all occasions
mhm,
and don't hold back. And a lot of people feel like, oh, Lewis can like talk politics and speak out because he has the luxury of doing so because he's a 7-time champion and he has job security and he's the most marketable driver. Um, and Max could talk about politics, but I don't think he cares.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think he's a political person. Um, but he will talk on things if he cares about them and wants to give his opinion.
Yeah.
But I think then there are a lot of other drivers on the grid that feel like if they decide to be political or speak on something controversial, it makes them less brand safe,
Mm.
and could potentially, at least in the long term, jeopardize their career.
Yeah. I agree with that, and I think it's interesting because I do wonder, like, how much that's true and how much that's, you actually were the one who sent me this video of Jaylen Brown talking about the panopticon of, media training, which,
Yeah.
if you don't follow basketball, Jaylen Brown plays for the Boston Celtics, and he's also
And
brilliant.
he's so smart.
Literally, like, this is a small aside, and I think slowly but surely I will make everyone who listens to this podcast watch basketball also. But I think, like, watching him talk about watching him talk about the idea of, like, Foucault's panopticon as a self-policing situation for athletes, and he was specifically talking about black athletes, but I think it applies in all situations as well. The idea of, like, media training being so much of a self-policing system that you are almost curious with these drivers when they make these statements or, like, lean one way or don't lean any way at all. They just try to stay as unproblematic as possible. I almost always wonder, like, was this a line from the team, or is this just you being so afraid to take a stance on either side for possible consequences that no one's actually told you will be the case? Like,
Right.
and it's interesting because I do think it's so much more so in Formula 1. There seems to be, like, so many non-statements, and then the things that they
Mhm.
do slip up on seem to be, like, the funniest, most random beefs that they decide to make super public.
I think it's a mix. And also we need to mention, we can't go without mentioning Sebastian Vettel,
Mm,
who's been very
very true.
political and vocal throughout his career, but he's not currently on the grid. But I think it's a mix. I think some feel like they can't speak on things, and then frankly, I think a lot of them just like don't care,
Yeah,
and they're not political because they're at this point they are privileged, relatively wealthy drivers who live in a bubble and are comfortable and uh, don't really care about anything about except their bottom line.
yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Um, yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it is the likability factor in Formula 1 as, like, because you and I talked about this the last time we were on, Grid Chat as well, like, each one of these drivers has a reason beyond their own driving capabilities that they're
Hmm.
on the grid. And
Yeah.
it was interesting because I posted about Jacques' statements about Daniel Ricciardo, and the response primarily from Daniel Ricciardo fans was, well, like, everybody else is on the grid for reasons they shouldn't be. Like, Checo got re-signed, in this argument. They were saying Checo got re-signed because of the money he brings to the team, and, like, look at how poorly he's performing. And Lance Stroll is on the team because of his dad. And I agree, like, there are different reasons why everybody's on, but I guess the question is, if likability is your extra reason, like, how steady does that remain? Do you have to find a better way to balance remaining likable to everyone?
Hmm. Yeah.
And is that possible? I don't know if it is. So,
Good point.
yeah, but we can jump into race weekend, if we like.
Let's do it. Let's
Um,
do it.
the Checo situation, I find the soundbite every all weekend was not a great way to start your renewal with Red Bull, because he was out in Q1 again, and my boy Logan out qualified him again. Shocking.
Your boy.
My boy. I do love Logan. I feel for him. I wish him the best. I know the best probably won't be in Formula 1, but I do wish him the
I
best.
don't I don't have anything against Logan Sargent. I just like he hasn't shown or done anything to make me like him.
Mm,
Like if he does have a personality, I haven't seen it yet.
that's
Um
fair.
and I don't know whether that's because he's buttoned up or media training, but like uh I I feel like he's similar to like Zhou Guan Yu, and that like I know nothing about him.
Mm,
And I feel like I am chronically online and I'm constantly consuming media. Uh, and I just other than like sort of him being there,
Mhm.
I don't have a I don't have like a read on what he's like as a person.
That's fair. I think I've watched a couple of videos that gave me, like, a little bit of lore, I feel, and then obviously he got moved up to Williams, I think a year too early,
Sure.
because they were in a situation, and then I think he just has, like, this underdog air in a very odd way because it's not like he comes from, like, extremely humble beginnings, but I think, like, he has this underdog air of, like, it seems like nobody really wants to hang out with him, and then him and Alex have become a lot more friendly and fun in their, stuff that they do for Williams, and
The
I've seen
podcast
yeah.
segments they've been doing on social media have been
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, that's where I feel like I've seen a lot of his personality, and then I think also his radio messages make me sad, like, I just want him to have a good day every time he,
Sure.
like, crashes or he automatically, he apologizes. None of these things are reasons why he should continue to have a seat that he can not operate at extreme levels or that he should
Yeah.
keep a seat over someone like a Valtteri or a Carlos, like, I wanna see someone else in that seat next year because 'cause I'd like to see Williams moving forward, but
Yeah.
I have, like, a sense of, like, I feel like nobody was his friend in high school, and nobody wants to be his friend now, and I just want him to I don't know.
I bet he was fine in high school.
You
I
think
bet he
so?
was just fine.
Maybe.
Uh, I don't know. I have not seen anything on the track that like shows me a moment of brilliance or like,
Mm,
oh, given the right circumstances, he could do this. It's
yeah.
just like, yeah, he finished in the points at Coda, but that's because there were like 2
Yeah.
disqualifications, I think.
Yeah, there were.
Um, so like I haven't, I mean, I know, who do I know? I'm just a fan. Like I don't know shit, but I have not seen anything to be like, oh, there it is.
Yeah. He gives me what he gives me, especially this year, and I think also the Australia situation of, like, getting taken out, and having to give his car, having not been the one to crash, I think
Mhm.
also gave him a little bit more likability in my eyes, but I think what it is for me, him getting moved up too early, I
Yeah.
it gives me such a sense of, like, what if he had simply come when it was his time to come? I don't think he ever would have been a champion, don't think he necessarily would have been a race winner either, but I think
Mhm.
he could have been, a solid middle of the field addition to a team. Is that what we're looking for? Not really, but it's like a story of lost potential to me, but it's all we can do.
Fair.
Yeah. But also fair. I don't think obviously James Vowles is making as many statements as possible to make it clear that that seat's available. So I doubt that
I
he's
mean, he
sticking
has
around.
been campaigning for Carlos,
Yeah.
which I love.
I love it, but I personally want to see Valtteri in that seat. I think he is such a like good, solid driver who gives as much as he can to the team. He's a good team player. He has a life
Yeah.
outside of Formula 1. He seems to be fine
He's come
whenever
out of a
yeah.
shell
Yeah.
at Sauber
He's
for
funny.
sure.
He's
Yeah.
very funny, and I think he also like, he's already worked with James, they have a good balance. I think he would be helpful to Alex overall.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so I feel like as a team play, I really wanna see Valtteri in that seat as like a I think Carlos brings the idea of 2 really good drivers that will ultimately be competing against each other versus Valtteri and Alex are 2 really good drivers that will work together, in my
Is that
opinion.
your prediction that Valtteri is going to go to Williams and Carlos is going to finally give in and sign with Audi?
No, it's what I want, but I think Carlos will end up going to Williams, I think is my feeling. I think
It's
the
a lot. I think it's a lot less money though.
yeah, it is. I think it just depends on if he prefers does Carlos want to win or does Carlos want money? And I think that's really what's the choice between those 2 teams right now. Not that Williams tomorrow he's gonna be winning at either, but I think he's further ahead in terms of the power unit next year and everything everybody's saying about the engine, and I think he probably that's the this debate he's having right now.
Do you think any of these drivers right now who are currently like shopping seats, who are
Mhm.
like sought after drivers
Yeah.
on the Formula One grid, are like DMing Adrian Newey? Well, not DMing, but like calling him, being like, "Hey, man, so
So
what's your next move?" Like,
I I'm sure people are trying to find out before they make a decision because I
yeah,
think also like I do wonder in these negotiations how much certain teams are like pushing the rumors. Like there were rumors for a while that Williams was getting Adrian Newey somehow. And I wonder how much of it is they're like, yeah, I mean, you may have heard some stuff that we also heard. We can't confirm or deny. But
Sure.
not a great way to start a relationship, but am
No.
curious. But I think there's also partially them waiting to figure that out too. Like, has Adrian Newey signed a contract with someone, and if so, when will it be announced? And can they hold out long enough to see?
It's like lying, saying that there are all these cool people at your party, and then someone shows up and they're like, "There's nobody here."
Yeah. It's like in Abbott Elementary. Do you watch that show? Every
Yeah.
time she does the Ava Fest and she lies that there's going to be someone there to get everyone. That's what's happening.
So
Everyone's
funny.
like, we totally have someone that you might want to work with. Don't know if you've heard of him.
So good.
So you have that, but then also speaking of, like, you have I think Adrian Newey's going to Ferrari, and clearly they need him after this weekend. This was insane to me because you have both Ferraris out in Q2, and they had
Great segue, by the way.
Thank you. I don't know if you heard, but I did improv for a while.
Anyway, continue.
We had both Ferraris out in Q2 with fresh softs in the garage, which I was so frustrated by, and also Charles was frustrated by. And I have in my notes that it was like watching someone go home from tribal council on Survivor with an idol in their pocket, because it was right there. There was no reason not to do it. And I don't know if you saw Charles's post-quali interview where he had a press officer with him, and the press officer was like whispering in his ear of what to say, whatever. And it was like a long period of time. And then Charles, like, after the guy finishes talking, he literally goes, "Yeah, no, I'm gonna say what I want to say," and then does the interview.
Oh my God.
It is a wild clip. It was literally like, "Yeah, I'm gonna listen to what you have to say," but and then says on camera, mic'd up, "No, I'm gonna say what I want." It was like, oh.
Yeah. Wow. We can talk about this later once we get to the race we got, but there was a lot of tension between Leclerc and his engineer.
Yes, there was. And yeah, interesting. But yes, we can talk about it during the race. But yeah, this was just like the worst weekend coming off of Monaco for them. And I don't know if it was the rain. I don't know if everybody all of a sudden forgot all the stuff they've learned this year. We've been doing so much better. Maybe everybody got drunk before the race. I don't know, but it was not good news.
No.
And lastly, we have the last qualification. I mean, yeah, the last quality thing that was necessary to talk about was George Russell getting pole with a tow from Alex Albon. But would he have gotten pole if it weren't for that tow? Probably not, as he had the exact same time as Max.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I honestly, I will tip my hand a little bit. I was like, if someone has to do it, I'd rather Max have gotten pole. I did not. The thing that's so hard to watch George do is fail to maintain his advantage about anything, and I find him to be he chokes in the end of everything, and so it's harder to watch him go from having pole position to falling back and just not maintaining any sort of like control of a race than it is to watch him, try to fight up and then lose it in the end.
So it's like a door that's not properly aligned. He can't close.
You're so right. That was great. That was great.
Thank you.
He gets no cookies. Cookies are for closers.
I don't know. I know he got the toe from Alex Albon, but to quote that TikTok sound, a win is a win.
True. Yeah, it is. It is technically. I don't know, but it wasn't a win. That's the thing.
It wasn't a win.
That's my concern. I don't know. He gives me heartburn when you like have everything in front of you and you just can't. You cannot finish. It's very LeBron in the finals. Like there's always complaining. There's always consistent drops, and I don't know. It's harder to watch him go from the front to the just not being able to do it.
Right.
But
yeah, I was happy for him. I thought he was gonna maybe get an opportunity to plot a win, but just was not in the cards.
Well, I like that you had faith in him. I'll get there one day. But I will say, in terms of people who did do well on the wets, the Haas boys, I was losing my mind. I was in a bar watching it out here too, and like the crowd screaming every time Kevin Magnussen passed someone. He got all the way up to fourth before they had that horrendous pit stop.
They looked at the time like geniuses.
Yes. And they might have been if maybe the pit stop had been right. Like, when he went in and there was no one there, I was like, how is that
Yeah,
possible?
yeah,
Insane.
that was rough
Yeah.
for sure.
But it was amazing to watch because he went all the way up to fourth before that fell. So
Yeah, or if the rain had come earlier, like they it could have been the right move, but that was exciting.
it was. Yeah, I
I'm
literally
like,
remember
stop
being
the
like,
count.
it's over. Give him the Yeah, I was like, I remember sitting there and I was like, is Kevin Magnussen about to be leading this race? Because
Yeah.
what a wild situation that could have been. I would have enjoyed seeing it actually, despite my
Ugh.
issues with him last week. We also had the Mercedes upgrades, which right before the race weekend started, we had Lewis say like he felt like a podium was in sight. And I remember
Mhm.
being like, please don't tell me that. Like,
Don't jinx it.
yeah, like please just keep that to yourself. And also just because it sounded so ridiculous to hear that they were potentially going to be fighting for a
But
podium.
then you watch the practice sessions, and
Mhm.
Lewis looked incredible. Like,
Yeah.
Lewis was top in the practice sessions, and I'm like, oh damn! Like, I think Hamilton is going to podium, and he also has like an incredible track record, pun intended, at Canada.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this was actually, they said his qualifying seventh was his worst qualification ever in his entire career at Canada.
Yeah,
So bummer, but yeah, I think I guess the front wing, which is what they gave George, and they only had one at Monaco. They both had it this race, and obviously whatever they've changed has made a big difference. Um, which will be interesting to see if that continues to be making a difference after this race. But you had Lewis at the top of the charts in everything, even all the way through to Q3. He should have been. So I guess we can get into the drama now. What was interesting post race weekend was to hear that Lewis said that final lap during qualifying during Q3, which was just abysmal, for it was just so low compared to every other time he had been putting in. He has said that his tires were not brought up to temperature before he was put out there for
mm.
his last lap. So you have that, and we can talk about the other drama when we get to get to the end of the race. But it is interesting to see that it does seem like the upgrades are there. It also seems like there are these moments where there's perhaps a little bit of sandbagging being done, which
Yeah,
is
they're
interesting.
prioritizing the driver who's going to be there next year.
Yeah. I guess
Yeah.
for me though, what is fascinating about it is I'm like, you are still competing together this year though. Like, I get
Mhm.
the argument about George continuing to finish ahead of him. I get, like, yes, you are prioritizing that driver. Totally understand. The choice to have him, like, if it is true that his tires were not brought up to temperature before, having him in seventh doesn't help you. Like, what's wrong with if you wanna do what you wanna do, that's totally fine to have George in that first position, and, you wanna make your statement about him leaving and whatever, but why not go after a 1-2 for the rest of the year? Fascinating to me.
I mean, we could be wearing tinfoil foil hats with
Very
this,
true.
and it just was. I don't know. They're not actually sandbagging him. It just is what it is.
Yeah, they just, had cold tires. They're like, "Oops, so sorry. Guess we forgot to turn that on." I don't
Whoops.
know. Our bad. But yeah. But then the race itself, obviously chaotic, and we had two safety cars, which I am curious how you feel about this. The first safety car when it came out, when Logan caused a safety car, um, we had our pit stop situation, and that's where Max got in front of Lando again, which they have team radio from Max's engineers saying, "What goes around comes around. That's Miami back."
Yeah. Well, I think it was because Lando chose not to pit with the other drivers in the front
Yeah,
and stay out, but then he got caught behind the safety car, which seriously slowed down his lap time,
yeah,
and lost a lot of time and allowed Max to be able to
yeah.
uh,
When he
come out in
came
front.
out from his it was crazy because when he came out of his when Lando came out from his pit stop, he does come out in front of Max, but he was coming out so slow that Max was able to pass him
Yeah,
right after.
that was the second time. The first
Oh,
time Lando
yes.
came out, he came out in line with Oscar.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have so yeah, it's interesting because it's like it is, to be fair, like they the universe is righted itself, I suppose. But I do wonder without the safety car if Lando would have had this race again.
Good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, we'll never know.
He couldn't catch. It didn't seem like he was gaining on Max.
Yeah, I guess the
towards the end of the
question
race.
is, would he have kept the lead without it? Because there were 2 safety cars. So you
Yeah.
had if you'd only had one, I don't know.
I think they were gambling, trying to stay out and not do what everybody else was doing. But in hindsight, and it's easy to armchair quarterback this, he
Yeah.
probably should have pitted with the rest of the cars.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Especially because they had Oscar pit with the race leaders and left Lando out. So then moving him in, obviously, what can we do? Again, easy to armchair quarterback, like you say. Every time I do this, I'm like, yeah, like me personally, I would have not done what they did that lost the race. It's like, oh, do you think so? Do you think you would have done the other thing, having watched the race from the comfort of your own home? Maybe, yeah.
Having such like a base level knowledge of motorsport.
It's like, well, they had to change the tires at some point, and me personally, I wouldn't have done it when they did it.
Listen, as someone who's watched all 6 seasons of Drive to Survive and 1 full season of Formula One, I'm kind of an expert.
They just gave me a headset. I think I could do it. Yeah, whatever. That you'd have all the math, you know what I mean? All the answers would be in front of you.
Sure.
And then the other thing that I did wonder about the safety car situation is if there had not been both safety cars, I do wonder how much further George would have ultimately fallen back, because he was actively losing places with each safety car. And when he came back out, obviously everything was stacked back up. And I'm curious if he would have even the podium is another conversation, but I do wonder if he would have even been fighting for a podium had they not had those backups.
Yeah.
The what if, as Max says. Or it's always if, I think is what he said. But to get into the other drama, Esteban Ocon, the radio of him absolutely refusing to let Pierre pass was wild.
It's pulling a Gandalf.
Yeah, you shall not, in fact, pass. Which is crazy because he said, I don't know if you listened to that radio, or I couldn't tell if it was broadcast on the TV because where I was super loud. But when I rewatched after, the radio was like, he absolutely not, keep dreaming. I was like, oh, all right. And that's why I wonder where he's going next year, because it doesn't seem like a mutual parting of ways as it was previously done.
Engineer's like, okay then, safe travel.
I
Bon voyage.
I do always wonder, like, what do you do on the other side of the radio if that's what's like when that happens? What are you gonna do? You can't be like, I'm telling you.
I imagine being a race engineer is like being a parent to a petulant child, and like you're just trying to coax them into doing what you want them to do, but there's not 100% chance that they're gonna follow orders.
Yeah. It's to some degree with this situation, he already knows he doesn't have the seat next year, so why should he follow anyone's instructions? Is like probably his mental state.
He's like a reality TV villain. He's not here to make friends.
Absolutely not. Not even here to be a teammate at all. So I was shocked by the clarity at which he said no, I guess, but I do fear for the engineers that have to deal with that. It's like I was like, oh, I don't think that's a job that I want. I don't think I would want to be in charge of that.
No, absolutely not.
Oh, speaking of teammates as well, we also have Danny Rick. He had his 5-second false start penalty as well, which he served under the safety car, which I think helped. But then he was also at the end given the green light to fight Yuki, which I mentioned earlier, I felt was like them giving him a chance to like prove himself in the current
Mhm.
state of contracts. But we got that radio message, and obviously it's delayed, but it was like right after that that Yuki started dropping and they didn't show on screen what happened. I was so scared that Daniel had just hit Yuki like immediately
Oh,
or
no.
cost, but it was obviously not what happened. Yuki hit a curb, but the way it was
Yeah.
broadcast, it was I was like, "Oh god, what just happened?"
What's interesting with that false start penalty is in the broadcast, they reference Lando Norris' false start, which did not get penalized, and
Mhm.
one other false start that's happened this season, both of which were very similar to what happened with Daniel Ricciardo that were not penalized,
Mm.
but for some reason they penalized him, and people were talking about the inconsistency in rulings, like same infraction, different outcome, different ruling.
Yeah, I felt the same way with the fact that George didn't get a penalty for the Oscar incident. It felt pretty cut and dry that he should have had a 5-second penalty, and
Yeah.
it is interesting to see which penalties are awarded and which ones are not, and which drivers they affect and which ones, and how that like, arguably, George having gotten the 5-second penalty, I believe would have put Lewis on the podium, but I think also he would have been close to I'm not sure if it was exactly that he would have dropped below Oscar or not, but it was close. Um, so it's like it's interesting to see how much they're factoring in which teams would be affected and which drivers would be affected before the penalties are awarded. Same thing with Kevin Magnussen not getting a penalty in a race ban.
It's like there's no set of guidelines for making a ruling on particular infractions. Like they just go off vibes.
I know Lando didn't get the penalty for the false start because the computer didn't register it as a false start, despite the fact that everybody
That we
said
all
it was.
saw it.
Yeah, we all saw it. Lando was like, "Oh, that was my bad. I did do that. Sorry." And they also, I think, in the ruling said, "We all saw it. It did happen, but you know, what can we do?" The computer didn't,
All right.
and that's why AI is really good with stuff. Computers should make decisions. God, we actually didn't talk about the AI trophy, which we don't have to because it might be a little contentious, but I found it.
Who are you gonna offend? AI?
I actually there's
No,
been
let's
like
talk about the AI trophy.
we can
That shit was stupid. There are so many like talented, qualified people who could have made a beautiful like
agreed.
trophy. Like, why are we making it AI generated?
And here's my thing about it, which I'm always gonna say, and I'm very frustrated by, and like this might affect us more than it affects other people, but we just had two of the biggest labor union strikes ever over
Yeah.
AI replacing artists, and I don't understand the description of it was so frustrating. They were like, we used the data from the car and we made a trophy with AI. What are you talking about? Literally, what are you talking about?
This is just someone at an agency who just loved like this idea and we're like, oh, this is so brilliant. People are going to love this. And no, everybody hates it. Like, it is such a stupid idea. Like it's like the joke that everyone says, like AI was supposed to take care of all the menial tasks so I could write and do poetry and make art. But now AI is making all the art and I still got to do all the fucking menial tasks. What the fuck?
It's
What the fuck? It's like sorry. It's like the Mahindra AI influencer all
yes.
over again.
Oh my god. Well, and also the thing about it that is so mind-boggling to me is I'm like, I get it. You can use AI in certain ways for it to be helpful on the engineering side of things. You can use AI to crunch data. You can do all of those things. But if you talk to any of these drivers that were there before all of this tech as well, they will tell you that there are things that like a driver and an engineer can do that a computer will never understand because you can't, again, as you always joke, like you actually can't go off vibe. Like you need to go off vibes sometimes, and a computer cannot understand a vibe. So it's like it's
A
so
computer can't understand a vibe. That
they
is so
can't.
good.
And it's so frustrating because everybody who defends AI when it comes to art, I do not understand because fun fact, before I started working in film and TV and went to film school, like I worked in tech and I have programmed quite a bit and I was on my high school robotics team. But the thing about computer programming that I don't understand how people don't get a computer cannot create an original thought. So AI, when you're doing AI art, it is trained off of existing art created by other artists that has
Yep.
been fed into these systems that's training their AI. And
Mhm.
the best explanation of like this happening and why AI cannot create original thought is if you look at the debacle that Google had when they first launched their AI system. You had them like people were asking, there was a loop inside this AI that basically when people asked the AI to generate a photo of like a historical white figure, it would not generate a white person. So like if you asked for it to generate the founding fathers, it was generating pictures of Hamilton because it had been fed so much Hamilton fan art and Hamilton like photos of cast photos. So
And
when
that's
you
progress.
that's exactly, we're rewriting history. So it's like the point being like it can AI is often wrong because you're feeding it the actual like the fandom
Yeah.
content, the entirety of Tumblr. Like it's you can't put these things in and expect original artwork. So ultimately the trophy for Canada was not generated by an artist because it stole art from other artists to
Right.
make this. So
It was
it's
an
frustrating.
amalgamation of its input.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's and the other fun fact, computers actually cannot generate a random number. It's actually impossible for a computer to be random. So
Okay, but once AI can understand vibes, it's over for you
it's over.
hoes.
It's so over for us. The second it can truly get a vibe, once it can get the intangible of the vibes, it's over for
Once
us.
AI starts describing stuff as it's giving,
We were looking at something that gave trophy. It's giving trophy. God. Anyway, AI rant aside, I just I didn't even actually watch the trophy ceremony, so I don't even know what it looked like in the end. Um,
I didn't watch the podium ceremony either.
yeah, so boo. That's the summary of this segment. Boo to
Yep.
AI. We also had a let's see. The last thing I'll say about the Mercedes situation, which continues to get more contentious every race, I feel, in post race interviews, we have this last 2 laps pass of George taking the podium from Lewis in literally the last 2 minutes of the race.
He had DRS in the straight, right?
He did, yes. And he used it. And if you watch it, the thing that I thought was interesting because it was said on the broadcast as well, and it was kind of how a lot of people I think felt taking the risk in the last 2 laps on a wet track to pass your teammate when there's no possibility of passing the next person,
Mhm.
especially given George's track record for crashing in the last lap,
Yeah.
seemed like an unnecessary risk to me. It seemed like a risk of intentional statement making from the team to not give the call to say just hold position for the last 2 laps. There's no difference in points for us. There's nothing to be gained by passing in the last moment.
I did not watch the interviews afterwards. What did Lewis Hamilton seem to have an opinion or a take on that?
Yeah, so we did see Lewis and it's a kind of one of those. It's one of those that he's given where he has that tendency where it looks like he wants to say more than he's saying and he's sort of navigating what he's saying, but basically he said that he was told he had a free stop, but he didn't realize that George was being put onto mediums, and then when he was put onto hards he thought he was being put onto mediums. I do believe, to be fair to the team, he was out of tire allocation for mediums. He didn't have another set, and George did. But they put him onto hards, and then when he was back on the track, there is radio with Bono of him being like, why am I on hards and why is George on mediums? And he said if he had known that George was going to be put on the mediums and he was going to be put on hards, he wouldn't have taken the stop. He would have stayed out.
If he was out of mediums, did he use most of them in the practice sessions? I'm confused.
I am unclear about that because he seemed to also be unclear as to why he didn't have another set of mediums. And Bono is the one who said that he didn't have another set. I think so. Lewis was on mediums when they pitted the both of the cars, and so
Mhm.
when they pitted him, he had that fresh set of mediums on, and they changed him for the last laps into the hards. And so his argument is he would have stuck with the mediums he was already on versus switching. And I think obviously it looks like he had used softs that he could have used, but I think it would have been too risky for as many laps as they had left, it seems. But yeah, it seems
Got it.
like had he been like brought into the conversation of what the actual strategy was, it's not what he agreed with. And then once he was back on the track, he also very clearly was not happy. But to be fair, he also said that this is one of the worst performances he's ever had, and he made a number of mistakes this race. But again, it felt if the cars had been reversed, they would have been told to hold position. And also, George just doesn't have a track record of passing safely in the final couple of laps. So it felt a little wild to make that decision. And I don't know. I think regardless of whether it's true or not that there's a situation going on where they don't want Lewis to perform well, I will say that I am shocked at how poorly they're managing the PR of it all, of this management, of this move. Because to me, if you're a fan of a team, like if you are a Mercedes fan overall and you're a Lewis Hamilton fan, when you find out that Lewis is leaving, it should be like a struggle to decide which team you're going to support next year. And
Yeah.
I think PR wise, whether what we're seeing is true or not, it's being managed so poorly that you're seeing Mercedes fans be like, I can't support this team anymore.
If I were running Mercedes, which I'm not, because I am just a mediocre comedian, I would be treating this from like a PR and comms like perspective as like a victory lap. Like we did something incredible
Yes.
together. We had an incredible run. We like ruled the turbo hybrid era. We have like I believe 8 constructors championships, 7 drivers championships. We fostered the career of and partnered with someone who will go down as one of the greatest drivers of all time. We're so grateful for everything he did, and we want this to be the best possible season it can be, and send him off and let him know how much he means to us.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, if I was Mercedes, I'd be like, we are going to prioritize Lewis in his final season. We're going to give him whatever he wants. We're going to do whatever he wants so that there is no bad blood and it is the most amicable breakup possible.
Yeah, in my opinion, what they should have done, the argument and like the again, as you said, mediocre, comedian hanging out. But I feel like if they would have made the narrative Lewis fights for 8th title with Mercedes, like he would have they could have basically said, look, like we know we only have 1 year left. All we want is to be the team that Lewis won the groundbreaking number of championships with. We want it to, be history. And because at the end, then you have the image of, I can't believe Lewis would leave this team. Like you get all the good PR of being the home team and being this team that gave him all the support. And obviously, would he have won another drivers championship this year? Most likely not. But like fighting for one, keeping him up there and being the team that like the entire year, you win the breakup. You win the breakup by being like, we gave you everything you wanted. We love you so much and we're very sad to see you go.
Yeah.
So it just
be the better man.
Yeah. Instead, you've just got bad blood. You've got bad blood. Now we got bad blood. But it's also like on top of that, you have like George sleeping over. Like all of the lore that has come out of this breakup has just been worse and worse from Mercedes every day, I feel. And it may not even be true. Like the things that we're finding out, Lewis
George
could be
sleeping over at Toto's apartment?
Yes, it's Toto's home. Do you not know about this?
I read something about it, but I didn't like go do a deep dive into it.
James.
Was he having like a slumber party, like a pajama party?
So basically the BBC did a podcast where, or they're still doing it, but they happen to be basically like with large amounts of access the day that Lewis announced that he was leaving. So they have interviews with Lewis, Toto, and George about finding out that Lewis was leaving and like what happened that day. All of the interviews are normal until you get to George's, where George is like, I found out because I was sleeping over at Toto's house the night before, and then Lewis rang and said that he wanted to come by to talk. And I thought that I would give them some privacy. So I snuck out of the house before Lewis got there. And this is how he's phrasing it. I was like, what? Nobody asked you for this information. He's like, he snuck out. He like slept over, had a little slumber party, snuck out before breakfast so that Lewis could come over. And then Lewis comes over, doesn't see George sneaking out of the home. So he says, and then as soon as Lewis and Toto finished talking, George said that Toto called him and said, "You're never going to believe what I just found out." And I was like, all of this should have stayed private.
Could you imagine if Lewis Hamilton had knocked on the door of Toto Wolff's home and George had answered like and wearing a robe or like in his pajamas with Toto's mug? Being like, oh, hey.
Like a mug that Lewis bought too. You know what I mean? Like Lewis. Best team principal ever. I don't know why he volunteered that story. And I think maybe that is the story that tipped me to an edge of like being like, I want to be free. I can't be a Mercedes fan anymore. Some weird shit going on. But yeah, I don't know. But that's the situation. He loves a sleepover, I guess.
It's like, listen, if you want to drive for Mercedes, you have to have great lap times. You must be very marketable, and you must also be willing to have slumber parties with me on the first Saturday of every month at my home in Monaco. Susie will be out of town with the kids, so we'll have the place to ourselves. We can stay up. We can drink Dr. Pepper or Jolt Cola, whatever you want, with a lot of caffeine. We can watch Vanderpump Rules.
Oh my god!
We can like watch like a fun movie like 13 Going on 30 or Mean Girls.
It's so like I'm glad you hadn't heard about that because I think it has pinpointed the moment that I was like, I don't think I like it here anymore, because it's also like the stuff that I used to love coming out of that team. Like they did that "Can you watch my boss for a second" trend with
Toto,
him and Toto, and he's just like staring into the camera, very scary. That video last year would have been like, I would have loved it, would have saved it, would have watched it 1,000 times. This time I was like, ugh, please get your life together, go back to work.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
We can also do some prank calls. We can prank call Dr. Helmut Marko and be like, "Hello, Dr. Helmut Marko. We know it's 2 a.m. Is your refrigerator running? Hang up. Hang up.
Oh my god." But yeah, so I think it is like a situation that is being very poorly managed, and whether that's that Lewis is managing it much better and giving just enough for you to be like, wow, it really seems like they hate this guy. They either way that they've got to get a little bit of a PR spin, I think.
Yeah.
And simply allowing, I think actually they would have gained so much goodwill by telling George to hold position in this race and giving Lewis that podium, and it made very little difference and made no difference for the Constructors' Championship. I think it would have been worth it for them to do that. Speaking of other tensions, we had 5 DNFs, and as you mentioned, Charles and his race engineer were not thrilled with each other on the radio.
Yeah, there was like a disconnect between the two. I think what was happening, and like this is just like my very like newbie perspective, but it felt like his engineer was trying to omit information that he didn't want other teams to hear, and trying to be as general and coy as possible. But Leclerc wanted the information. He's like, I don't want to speak in code. Just tell me what the fuck is happening. You know?
Yeah.
And so, and also like, I haven't been able to figure out why his old engineer was replaced. Have they been public about that?
I don't think they've been public about it. I think it was one of those things that's been kind of danced around, and then Charles kind of minimized the situation when asked about it.
Okay.
So, because he wasn't fired, I don't believe. I believe he just was moved to a different position within the team.
Huh.
Because I believe...
Yeah, they just said it was organizational reason.
Yeah, so they never were public about it, and then I know Charles gave an interview where he basically was like asked about what the situation was, and he said it seemed more dramatic because I was just told last minute, so it made it sound like it was a bigger deal than it was. Um, but I
Yeah.
don't think anyone said why.
Yeah, it was Javi Marcos for a long time. Brian Bozzi, I think, has now only been his engineer for 2 or 3 races. It's a
Yeah,
pretty
pretty new.
new development. But
Yeah,
yeah, there seemed to be a lot of frustration from Leclerc across the board, not just with the car, but just with like how the team was giving him information. And I hope it's just a hiccup and they're able to sort of smooth things
same.
over the rest of the
Yeah.
season.
Yeah, obviously it was a rough weekend for Ferrari as a whole. It wasn't even just their relationship, so I have to hope that it was it was just a this weekend type of situation because we had both DNFs. Though people are taking I don't know if you saw Carlos's post apologizing for losing control and spinning out because he apologized to the team, but he also specifically apologized to Alex Albon. Which I
Hmm.
think was reasonable because he did end Alex's race as well. But everybody's taking it as like a sign that he signed with Williams, which I find very funny. They were like, "Oh, that Williams contract is already signed." It's like, or he's
Ooh,
apologizing for
baby.
ending a guy's race.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we also had so you have both Williams out, both Ferraris and Checo, which is a wild race to have that happen.
I expected Checo to have an incredible performance because the pressure of him fighting for his contract was no
Hmm.
longer there.
Yeah,
I thought he was going to have a phenomenal race, and I just don't know what happened there.
I don't know because he also had a bad qualifying last race as well, which I thought
Hmm.
a lot of after watching a lot of commentary about like who was at fault and whether Kevin Magnussen should have had a race ban. I did think it was interesting that a lot of people did point out the fact that Checo also has quite a few penalty points and is not necessarily the safest driver either, and he could have been equally at fault for that crash. Um,
Hmm.
and it's interesting because I think there was so much conversation about the fact that he wasn't fit for that seat anymore and that someone else should have been moved up. But it is the same conversation we're having with Daniel Ricciardo, I think, which is Checo brings specific things to the team in terms of monetary gain, in terms of fan bases, in terms of international fan bases. I read somewhere that he sells more merchandise than Max himself does. Um,
Yeah.
He's also more willing to play ball with the sponsors. Like, how much of Checo keeping that seat was actually about, um, his likability factor, quote unquote, and his economic gain?
I think it's all the things. I think it's like he's willing to be the number 2 driver to Max, not ruffle any feathers. It's the fact that he brings sponsorship money. He is a good driver.
Yeah.
Um, But I think more than anything, it's that like Red Bull was trying to find some semblance of consistency in what right now is a time of like great instability among Red Bull.
Yeah.
Uh, and I also read that apparently Ford, who is coming in to be partnering with Red Bull in next year or the year after,
Yeah.
um, apparently Ford really likes Checo
Mhm.
Perez. So like I
Hmm.
think it was just a combination of things. Like he sort of checked all the boxes, and like I think for that second seat, for many, Checo is the boring choice, the uninspired choice.
Mhm.
But ultimately, to keep Max happy and just try to like create some sense of consistency and stability, keeping him in that seat made a lot of sense. It's the 2-year deal that surprised me more than anything.
I'm also curious if that's a 1 and 1 as opposed to a 2-year, but I
Oh
like
yeah,
a solid 2. Um, because I lean that it is a 1 and 1 that they just don't wanna disclose.
sure.
But, I also think it shows, like you were saying about the instability. I also do think it shows how worried they are about where they're gonna be when the new regulations
Hmm.
come. Um,
Yeah,
and there's also all these rumors about Max either leaving the team to go somewhere else or, taking a year off, which I really don't know where the rumor's coming from, but it was, like, a couple drivers have said the same, like, they think Max might take a year off. So, um,
interesting.
yeah, which is I don't know, but George said so, but it was also the Daily Mail that reported that, so I never know if that is accurate. And, then you also had, we've had some, I think, pundits say the same. So, I wonder how much they're, like in 2026 we're going to have no Adrian Newey for our car. We're going to have all these new regulations. We're going to have a new power unit. Max might take a year off or leave. We have the infighting with Christian Horner and Helmut Marko. We need one thing guaranteed to be stable that year.
Yeah.
But I think it was an interesting. The last point I will make on Checo is it reminds me of the sort of merchandising with Spider-Man. So with Marvel, the Spider-Man merchandise sells more than anything else, regardless of if they release a movie that year or not. There's something about like his IP is just so globally the best that kids are obsessed with it. Like it crosses sort of different groups of people, and the merchandise itself sells more than anything else, whether it's a movie year or not a movie year. And it feels similar with Checo, where it's like when you go to a race, there are always, no matter how far they have to travel, an extreme amount of Checo fans. They're all in merchandise. They're all like very intensely there for him, whether he performs well or he doesn't. Mexico City obviously brings a large amount of money in for Red Bull through his merchandising and through their sponsorships that they have with him. And that fan base seems to stay there regardless of performance. And so I do wonder how much of it is like that is a really big economic factor that I think gets kind of downplayed when we're talking about him.
So TLDR, you think Checo is the Spider-Man of the Formula One cinematic universe?
I think so. Even
Okay.
when it's the bad, even Spider-Man 3 brought in more money that year for them than it should have. A bad movie.
Wow.
Yeah.
If we're just going off vibes, I wouldn't make Checo Spider-Man. I'd like probably lean towards like Piastri or like Orlando maybe.
I gotta be honest with you, that's a Tom Holland Peter Parker read. It depends on who your Peter Parker is that you're picking.
Yeah. And then who's Toby if they're Tom Holland? If they're like if Lando and Oscar are Tom Holland and Andrew Garfield, who's Tobey Maguire?
Let's see. It's gotta be. I obviously don't think Checo is there in terms of vibes. I think Checo is there in terms of merchandising, conversations, economics. But in terms of who would do that horrible little dance, that's the real question. And I think it might be a George, actually. George is the most memeable driver.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Hell yeah.
Now I'm like, oh, who's everybody? But I'll let that go. That's the 2010 Tumblr in me trying to leap out. Last on-track action was actually Max versus the groundhog. I don't know if you saw that in his post-race interview, where there was a groundhog that came onto the racing line, and he thought it was debris, and he was wrong, and he had to swerve out, and he almost crashed, he said. And then he was worried for the rest of the race that someone ran over the groundhog.
That's sweet that he cared.
Yeah. It seemed like a mix between caring for life and also not wanting to damage his car,
It's probably more so the latter, to be honest.
Yeah, it did vibe like a little bit more about the car than the groundhog.
There was a race last year. It was actually the Canadian Grand Prix last year where he hit a bird. Where Max hit a bird.
Yeah, he mentioned.
And his radio was like very like rushed and panicked, and he's like, "Oh my god, I think I hit a bird." And I think it was like behind like I'm reading it right now. It was behind the front right brake duct. So he just has like a history. He just has like a tendency to like kill animals with that car. Propensity.
Do you remember when what is his name? The romance cover guy, Flavio, was on the roller coaster. Fabio, yes. And got hit with the bird.
Broke his nose because he hit like a goose or something.
Yes, that's what I imagine is the same situation because of the speed at which you're going.
Last year when Max hit that bird at the Canadian Grand Prix in 2023, I said Red Bull can give you wings, but it can also take them away.
It sure can. God. I also am fascinated. I'm like, there seems like we're we're leaving obstacles that feel like they should probably be dealt with. Like leaving groundhogs out to be able to walk across the track, doesn't there seem like there's maybe like a something they could put
Do you
on the
think there
sides?
should be like a groundhog patrol keeping
Yeah.
them from crossing, like a groundhog crossing guard?
Yeah. Like please wait to let them go. Or like a, like a something groundhogs don't like on the edges of the track. What's the, how you can do that with like ant spray where they won't cross the
Yes.
door? They need like a,
Dimaceous earth or whatever it's
yeah,
called.
whatever. Yeah.
Possibly.
Something.
Or create a bunch of land bridges for them.
That would
Like
be cute. I like that.
Groundhog bridge.
I'm into the
Have it be
groundhog
like
bridge.
grass covered, so they're like they're more
they don't
likely to
know.
use it.
They just keep going.
It's like a natural bridge.
I love
They're
it.
starting to do that with highways now. They're creating like wildlife crossings over highways. So maybe they should be doing that over the racetrack.
Yeah, I'd like to see AI generate some bridges for the groundhogs next year. I think it'll work
put
out.
AI to work on that. Not designing a poster.
So yeah, we know how the race ended. We had a Max, Lando, and arguably undeserved George. So then post race penalties, though, there were a couple that I found fascinating. Obviously, we have Checo has a grid penalty for next race for driving in an unsafe condition with that rear wing damage that he drove for quite some time and like had active debris falling off his car. So he'll have a grid penalty next race again. And then the one that I found shocking was Yuki was called to the stewards for being late to the national anthem, and V Carb was fined 10 grand for this, which I didn't even know was a rule.
Well, if you ever see Martin Brundle or Will Buxton doing their grid walks,
Mhm.
often you'll see the drivers like speed walking to the front of the grid, or sprinting to the front of the grid. And often it's like not because they're trying to avoid talking to fans or getting selfies or trying to avoid the press. It's because they're running late.
Yeah. For the national anthem specifically.
But I think that's like it's pretty common that drivers make it to that like V red carpet like right before they're supposed to be there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. 10K seems, I mean, I guess in this type of sport, it's very negligible. It's just sort of a like, don't do that again. But it seemed like quite a bit for being, also, I guess the other reason why I thought it was a little silly was like, it seems like a penalty you could just automatically give out. You didn't have to necessarily call people to talk about it, but a fascinating one. And then obviously George did not have a penalty for the Oscar incident, which I think brings us back to like this active change in who gets what penalty, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I get the vibes that like George was like on the podium and super happy, and all the other drivers were like, "You shouldn't be here."
That's how I felt. I was like, I don't know about this, man. I don't know about it. And I won't speculate on where champagne was sprayed, but two people seem to have a lot more fun. That's all I'll say. So,
yeah.
I don't know. Well, that's Canada. Do you have any predictions for next week?
Next week we have Barcelona.
Yeah, I guess 2 weeks from now, actually.
2 weeks from now.
Yeah, it's Barcelona.
No, what I did like about the race in Barcelona last year is the circuit there does have high tire deg. So strategy, I think, is going to be, if it's anything like last year, I think strategy is going to be very important. It was, I think, for most teams, a 2-stopper, and for some a 3-stopper. So like, I think it's going to be a really fun race just based off strategy alone. You're not just going to have like one car. You're not just going to have everybody on hards for the vast majority of the thing and then switching to mediums like 60% or 3/4 of the way through. I think race strategists and pit crew are going to have a much bigger hand in this race the way than they do some of the other races, like say Baku, where they could drive the whole race without a stop if they didn't have to.
Yeah. Do you think I think in the same regard, like McLaren's the one that has the tire degradation most figured out, so it'll be interesting to see how they perform. With that being said, so I kind of would like personally to see an Oscar win for once. Don't know that that's happening, but I would like to see it.
He's primed for it. That guy is like Yeah, and also like always seems so calm under pressure. Like I feel like Oscar Piastri is like an old soul. Like he seems to be no, seriously, he seems to be like a 45-year-old like grizzled veteran stuck in like a 19-year-old kid's body.
I
Like
agree, actually. I do agree with you with that. Every time you watch him in Lando, Lando feels like a normal, like a child, and Oscar feels like, please, like it's almost like watching Fernando Alonso and Lance, like that age gap from time to time.
yeah, he just seems unfazed by everything.
Mhm.
And if I feel like if he did like a past lives regression, like Oscar Piastri is like was either like a driver or like did something that was like a very like high stress, high pressure job with a
Mhm.
lot of responsibility and like remained cool under pressure at all times.
Yeah, I agree. Or like a what's the like a king when kings had to do things. You know what I mean? Back in the day,
Yeah.
like a
Yeah,
wartime
for
king.
sure.
I could see it.
Yeah, I think he's like other creators. Like there's this great South African creator named Martin
Mm.
who has a TikTok account called Talking F1, and he's like he doesn't have a ton of followers, but he's like very very knowledgeable and very passionate. And has been watching Formula One for decades,
Mhm.
and he thinks Oscar Piastri is going to win a World Drivers' Championship in like the next 5 years. And
Mm.
like I every every race, I see it a little more and more.
Yeah. I agree with that actually. Like I do think I was talking to someone yesterday and they basically were like, I feel like he's playing the long game. Like he knows supporting Lando in this time is better for his career overall. And then there will be like a moment where that shifts and he takes that focus away. Which I do also kind of see. So and they did ask him yesterday during the race, they did ask him if he thought he could challenge Max when he was trying to fight George off. Which it sounded like they might swap the cars or like they were thinking about swapping the cars. So
Right.
I think
But then
McLaren
he
knows
said,
too.
"I just want to." He said, "I just want to keep driving my race." Right? Didn't
He said I have to focus on keeping George behind me. Please leave me to it.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah.
But
So it was like
was just such a mature response too.
yeah. It was the very most mature way to say please shut up. Like I really need you to shut up. Um
Yeah.
so I thought that was interesting too. But I think it's there for him. I don't know if it's at Barcelona, but I do think he'll my bold prediction is I think he'll have one before the end of the season. He'll have one race at least.
Wow.
I think so.
Love that.
Yeah, I think he's got it. I wouldn't have said that at the beginning, but now that we're seeing like a little bit of shakiness in the Red Bull camp and we're seeing the
Mhm.
possibility of people moving around, I think he's there. So, like if Monaco hadn't been the non-passing race that it was, it's possible we could have seen him really fighting for that
Because he
win.
was right on Leclerc for a good portion of the
Yeah.
Monaco Grand Prix.
Yeah. And to some degree, it almost felt like everyone was sort of like, I mean, don't you think he should just have it? Don't you think Charles should just have this race? Let's
Yeah.
just be cool about it, you know? So I think
Yeah.
any other track, I think he may have had it. So we'll see. Um Final predictions on where you think Carlos is going?
I want Carlos to go to Williams,
Mhm.
and I made like a long, very dumb video about it. But I want Carlos to go to Williams, but I think he eventually is going to take the money and go to Audi.
I think you're probably right.
I think he's gonna weigh out his options, and he's gonna be like the competitive edge that Williams could potentially have, but don't have right now, is not worth me not taking all of this money from Audi. And also Audi, when they become a factory works team, like Audi's been fairly successful in motorsport in any series that they've joined.
Mhm.
I think that's where he's gonna go.
Yeah. I think the other part that you're pointing out too that is real is he's bringing the money to Williams, like with his sponsorship. He's more of a benefit to Williams than Williams is to him in that regard.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, so I think it's a weighing of that as well. So I think you're right. I do think money will win out. But I think Williams wants him so badly that it's hard to say what they have up their sleeve.
I also think Audi as a car manufacturer is more in line with his brand
Mhm.
than Williams is as a team.
I agree. Um, I've been saying this, and I think I don't think he's the fit for the Williams culture and the brand. Like I think Carlos has an element of like Williams has this element of like scrappy, like you've got sort of hero narrative in Alex Albon of
Yeah.
versus Carlos, I think, has this legacy element with his dad and has this element of like posing next to a Ferrari for the last few years. Like it makes sense for him to be with a car manufacturer in that way.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Also, like Williams at this point are kind of like the Chicago Cubs of the Chicago Cubs before they won a World Series, before they broke the curse.
Yeah.
They're like the Chicago Cubs of Formula One, and that they're like the lovable loser.
Yeah.
And I don't think he fits with that. Like Carlos Sainz, for lack of a better term, is like a sexy Spanish driver who should be driving for a sexy brand.
Yeah.
And Audi is that. Next year, steak / kick / who knows what the fuck it's going to be called next year. That's not a sexy brand. Like Carlos Sainz in chroma green is not sexy.
No.
But Carlos Sainz with like black and silver and like hints of red sitting next to like a really nice Audi.
Yeah.
Like that makes sense.
Yeah. Him and Nico also, I think, will look good together in commercials. Like they have a bit of balance in terms of their type of personality. I think they can be funny together. I think it'll work. I think branding wise, it's the better move. I think winning wise, we'll see what he goes with. But.
And apparently his dad, I think, has a relationship with Audi.
Yeah, he does. I think that's where that whole thing started, was the expectation that he was planning. Actually, I did hear, and who knows because it's all rumors, but I did hear that was part of why Ferrari was like, we have this feeling that you're planning to leave anyway. So they started looking elsewhere too, knowing that they thought he was going to follow the Audi offer when they came onto the grid.
I don't believe that. I think Carlos would have stayed there with Charles for 5 to 7 years if it was on the table.
I think it's the same argument I have with him with the Mercedes situation. He was off. We think, at least it sounds like, he was offered the year extension before they knew they had the opportunity to get Lewis for 2025. And I think if he had done that, he would have been in a better position. But he was so adamant about the multi-year, which I get because the grid's going to be a lot, more closed to next year when negotiations are happening. But let's see.
Yeah.
Who knows? Well, this was fun. I had a great time.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. If people want to find you on the internet, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at this James Coker, on TikTok at this James Coker, and I have a YouTube channel which only has 150 subscribers. So if you could please subscribe to my YouTube channel called Temple of Vroom.
Ooh, I like that. It's very like a little doomy. I love it.
Well, it's like Temple of Doom, but Temple of Vroom.
Temple of Vroom.
And I am about to I'm 2 weeks late to this, but I'm about to release a 15-minute review of the Indy 500.
Ooh, okay.
Which I'm excited to do. I already edited it, and I just I sent it to someone to do some captions and some additional editing touches on it. But I've been working on it for about a week, and I'm very excited for it. And it is probably going to get no views. It's probably going to be an absolute flop. But follow me on YouTube at Temple of Vroom.
All right. You heard it here first. Temple of Vroom it is. And also this is breaking news. Thank you for the exclusive. Can't wait. But yeah. All right, James. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me.
Always, if you don't want to watch these races alone, you can join the actual grid chat. I host a group chat of motorsports fans where fan behavior is encouraged, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. We watch these races live together, chat about breaking news, and of course, send each other an unhealthy amount of memes. If you'd like to join the grid chat, you can do so at tandemproductions.com/grid chat. There will also be a link to that in the episode description. Once you fill out the form on the webpage there, you'll get an invite via email from me. If you want to connect, let me know what you thought about the episode, or even just ask me another question that you'd like me to cover on the show. You can find me on all social media platforms at Marissa Kamari. And one of the best ways to connect with me is if you're listening to this podcast on Herd FM. You can find me in the community section on Herd FM, where my username is just my first name, Marissa. And once we follow each other, after every episode that you listen to, I'll be able to comment and have a conversation with you directly. So again, my username on Herd FM is Marissa. As always, I've been your host, Marissa Tandon, and thank you for joining the Grid Chat.